Welcome to Mr. DeWire's episode on Ancient Greece, Part 1, The Introduction. Hopefully you're somewhat familiar with the ancient Greek gods and goddesses, like Zeus, king of the gods, Poseidon, god of the sea, Athena, goddess of wisdom, and Ares, god of war. Some things about Greek gods are actually a little misunderstood. For example, when going to war, it was customary to make sacrifices to Athena for wisdom and strategy on the battlefield, not Ares, who's the god that brought chaos to the battlefield. There were many other Greek gods and goddesses not pictured here, even demigods such as Percy Jackson. Maybe you're familiar with the movie 300, which tells the story of King Leonidas and his 300 Spartan warriors. This is based on a true story, and while the action sequences are amazing, they're mostly inaccurate. Greek soldiers were never allowed to break formation. This scene shows how it really was. Shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping. Now here's some vocab for you to memorize. Greek foot soldiers such as these were called hoplites, and this formation is called a phalanx. It was the most effective fighting force of the ancient world for centuries. Another well-known feature of ancient Greece is the architecture. Here you can see what it looks like today versus what it looked like when it was completed over 2,000 years ago. The columns and the roof line should look familiar to you. It's commonly found in the U.S., especially in government buildings such as the National Capitol and the White House. While I find the gods and the wars of the Greeks endlessly fascinating, we need to focus on their legacy. What common features of ancient Greece do we still have in the modern Western world? For example, our concepts of music, art, literature, poetry, botany, philosophy, government, and laws all reflect an understanding first developed in ancient Greece 2,000 years ago. Freedom. What is more American than freedom? But of course, this concept finds its roots, at least in government, 2,500 years ago with the ancient Greeks. They were the first ones to write it into laws. In the rest of the ancient world, Egypt, Persia, China, a small number of families typically controlled the whole civilization. All military loyalty was to them, and all legal and religious authority came from them. Even basic features of the natural world, floods, droughts, storms, and earthquakes, were attributed to the leader's ability, either as someone who communicates with the gods, such as Hammurabi, or someone who was a god, such as the Egyptian pharaohs. Greeks, on the other hand, were not controlled by religious leaders. So to question religious authority did not undermine someone who was in charge of the military. It didn't undermine the authority of anyone. That was a unique feature that allowed the Greeks to explore their nature and to write about it and to expand human knowledge. Let's look at their geography just a little bit. Here you have a map of the basic Greek world. In the far north was a group of Greeks called the Macedonians. While they considered themselves to be Greeks, the rest of Greeks kind of looked at them as outsiders, sort of the hillbillies of the Greek world, which is ironic because the most famous Greek of all, Alexander the Great, was actually a Macedonian, and they would actually conquer all of ancient Greece. Thessaly is another one that you'll see in the readings briefly. They rose to prominence near the end of the Greek city-states. The more common ones to know are the city-states of Attica, specifically Athens, and the city-states of the Peloponnesus, mostly Sparta. On the other side of the Aegean Sea is the Ionian Greeks. These are the Greeks that probably fought in the Trojan War, and it's also the Greeks that sparked the war with Persia, which is the basis of the story for 300. Now, in our modern times, this is Greece. But for the ancient world, this was their understanding of Greece. The Aegean Sea was the center. The last thing you need to know before we dive into our study of ancient Greece is that it's broken down into many time periods, and we're not going to study all of these the same amount. It starts with the Mycenaean Greeks, 1600 BC. The Greek Dark Ages is a time period that we know very little about, hence the name Dark Ages, followed by the Archaic period, which is when our concept of ancient Greece really begins. All the great things we know about Greece, that all came from the Classical period. Now, the ancient Greece of the Classical period was somewhat destroyed by the reign of Alexander the Great. At the same time, he spread the culture of ancient Greece throughout much of the Western world. And although the power of ancient Greece did come to an end, its culture and its ideas did live on through the Roman world. And it's through the Roman world that we still have that culture and ideas with us today.